Okay, so last week, I just want to add one thing. We had mentioned about, I had mentioned when we talk about cutting down the tree before the fruits had ripened to a certain degree about tashchis. So Rav Kook mentioned several exceptions. If the wood is more valuable than the fruit, or if the land is very valuable, there are a few things. Now the Rambam, and I mentioned that was a halacha in the week before's parsha. So actually, those four cases that Rav Kook brought, the Rambam himself mentions when he talks about these halachas. So uh, I still think, for whatever reason, people think it's a blanket isser to chop down a fruit tree. It's not, but the four situations that Rav Kook mentioned are all mentioned by the Rambam. Okay, Pirik Shishi, the sixth chapter. So this is talking about the monetary value or doing business with Shmitta produce. Eino since Charbah Perish Vias, you're not allowed to do business or use merchandising with produce of Shmita. Bimrat Shishi, sixth chapter. You see it says Shmita chapter 6. Uh-huh. If you want to sell a little bit, you're allowed to. But however, the money, the coins that you use become like Shemitah produce itself. You have to buy food with it and eat that food with sanctity of Shemitah. And the fruit that got sold, or the produce that got sold, still remains in its whatever state of Shemitah that it had. So it doesn't lose its Shemitah status. Now, what's the halacha nowadays? I don't know if you'd be able to use a credit card for it. No, I'm serious. I don't even know if you'd be able to use paper bills for it. It's a shiloh. And you certainly can't use Bitcoin for it. Okay. Rav Kook says, because the Mishnah mentions on this halacha that, so the Rambam says only a little bit, but he doesn't say how much is a little bit. So what's the little bit? So the Kesef Mishnah says that you're allowed to sell three meals worth of food. But the Ran, was a Rishon in the Gemara Avodah Zarah, I think, maybe not Avodah Zarah, that if you sold it as a favor, a little bit, it's allowed. And it appears that this means meaning if you gave him a good deal on it. So meaning for the buyer, meaning I gave him a good deal. So meaning if it was worth $3, I sold him for $2.50 plus he's going to owe me a small favor. They're both Jewish. They're both Jewish. Yeah. Yeah. So if someone had Shemitah produce and he had picked for his family and he had a little bit extra, so he was selling 3 cucumbers to his neighbor. So the halacha is a small amount you are allowed to. 3 meals worth. But if you sell it, the fruit remains Shemitah fruit, and the money now became holy for Shemitah purposes, and you could only buy food with that money, and you have to eat that, whatever food you buy with it, with Shemitah sanctity. Now, you don't have to buy vegetables, you could buy chicken with it too. But you have to buy people food. You can't buy animal food. So the Ron says you could also do it as a favor. So what does a favor mean? It means you give him a discount, but he's going to be happy with you because you gave him a discount. Because, well, so I mean, the way that I said it doesn't make so much, but according to Rav Kook, feels that the way that he said you didn't give him a full deal, you charge him for less than its deal. This isn't the way of selling, and therefore it's mutter. Now, to say that you gave someone a good deal so he's happy with you, that's not an unusual way of selling. So I don't know if I'm misunderstanding what Rav Kook wrote here or not. No, it's not at all the same. Because when you sell the chametz, it's not yours, and you're doing it to get around the avera or a potential avera. Here, you're not getting around anything. He needs a couple, cucumbers, and he can't get any, and you have a couple extra that you picked legitimately. So even though you're not allowed to buy and sell it a small amount, you're not acting as if you're an owner. If I would sell him a bushel, that's acting like an owner. But selling 3 meals worth is not an owner. And it appears that according to this opinion, you'd be able to sell even a lot. If that has to do with it, if it's you're giving him such a good deal, it's not normal business practices. This is not. It's if it's not business practices, then you're allowed to sell even more than 3 meals worth. Now, how you'd be allowed to get that, I'm not sure. The prohibition of selling Shemitah produce is from the Torah because it's meaning from the positive commandment that we have to eat it, and the Gemara says to eat it and not to sell it. So it's not an avera, but you're violating the positive commandment by not eating it yourself, according to the Ramban, Sefer Mitzvos. And it appears also from that Ramban that there is a mitzvah to eat perishvias. So this is a famous Ramban. People bring down that according to the Ramban, and Rav Kook here says it too, that it appears from the Ramban it's actually a mitzvah to eat perishvias. So according to that, though, according to the Ramban, maybe you're supposed to make a bracha when you eat it. Like the same way when you eat matzah on the Seder night, you make a bracha, Asher Kishan Mitzvanu al achilas matzah. According to the Ramban, you probably should make a bracha al achilas perishvias. Now, I'm serious. The Rav Kook doesn't say that, but if it's a mitzvah, you would make a bracha on eating it. When a Kohen would eat truma, he would make a bracha on the truma. When we eat matzah, we know we make a bracha. So eating apple and honey is not a mitzvah; it's only a custom. So there's no bracha, no bracha on the mitzvah, just on the food. Okay, so let me tell you, there's a difference because let's say there's a halacha you're not allowed to own chametz on Pesach. There's a halacha you're not allowed to spay or neuter your animal. So people want to know, can I sell my chametz or can I sell to the goy for Pesach? So I don't own it on Pesach. Can I sell the animal to a goy and then it'll be spayed or neutered while the goy owns it, and then I'm going to buy it back? In this case, there's no prohibition. It's not a losase. It's not a negative mitzvah. There's no mitzvah that says you can't sell it. The mitzvah says you have to eat it, and the Chazal made a drasha to eat it and not to buy and sell. But the halacha is if you sell a very small amount. So why are you not allowed to sell it? Probably because since it's ownerless, if you would buy and sell it, it looks like you're owning it. So therefore, if it's a very small amount, it's not a prohibition because you're not looking like the owner. You're selling 2 cucumbers. No, I'm serious. So, but the halacha is that if you buy money with it, that stays holy. The fruit stays holy, like Shmitta fruit, but the money also gets the holiness of Shmitta, and therefore you could only buy. So you could only buy Shmitta produce, or you could use it as part to buy a bigger thing. So therefore, you're not getting around it. By selling it, you're obligating yourself in more Shmitta laws because you're going to have to eat the whatever you buy, even if it's chicken or fish that's not even grown from the ground. You have to treat that as if it's Shmitta sanctity, which obviously it isn't. But that means you couldn't give it to your animal. You would have to keep the leftovers till they spoil and then you throw it out because we're not allowed to waste Shmitta produce. So you're not getting around anything. You're actually making yourself do more for Shmitta that way. I'm not saying it's a mitzvah to sell it for that in order to do more. I'm not saying that, but I don't see it at all like selling chametz because you're not doing it to circumvent any other problem. Any food, you could buy other vegetables or produce, even if it's from Chutz La'aretz. They imported the wheat from Ukraine, but if you used Shemitah money to buy it, then then it has sanctity. But you don't have to buy fruit, but you have to buy people food. So you could buy chicken, meat, fish, even though it's not a Shemitah produce. I guess you could buy candy also, but you couldn't buy a pencil with it, even if you chew your pencil. Um, um, Okay, an opinion that looks like a commentary on the Ramban and Sefer Mitzvah says that there is no mitzvah to eat Shemitah produce, but you're not allowed to do non-eating things with them, like sell it or waste them. But it appears in the Ramban and there's a commentary on Chumash that the main prohibition against selling Shemitah produce is even if you are selling in bulk, more than 3 sudos, you're not allowed to sell even in bulk, but that's if the field had been locked. So it wasn't, but because once you didn't let people come in and take it, and you didn't make it ownerless, then you're not allowed to buy it. The Chachamim said you wouldn't be even to be allowed to buy any of that. But according to the Ramban, if the field had been left open, so it was ownerless, the only thing that the Chachamim prohibited was they prohibited from buying more than 3 meals worth from a person who is not meticulous in his mitzvah observance, because we're worried that if he has that much money, he's not going to buy food with that money. Meaning in those days, they didn't go to Walmart or Costco and buy a lot of food at a time. They would just buy for what they needed. So if he had $20 and he only needs $10 to buy food, we're worried he's going to use the money to buy non-food items, and then he's going to be using Shemitah money with Shemitah sanctity for the wrong things. So that's the problem with it. So there was a discussion. I don't know what the conclusion is, but I did see it brought up somewhere. Yeah. What's the definition of leaving your field open? If you say everyone could come from 2 to 3 in the afternoon every day to pick, is that considered that it's ownerless and open, or does it literally we have to be open 24 hours a day? What if someone leaves it open from 2 to 3 in the middle of the night? They're certainly they're following the letter of the law, maybe, but they're certainly breaking the spirit of the law, because who goes at 2 in the morning to pick fruit? You can't. It's dark. You can't see what you're picking. So that is an issue also. Okay, Tosos and Sukkah in the Rash in the 7th chapter of the Mishnah says that the prohibition against selling Shemitah produce is only if you yourself had bought the peiros. If you had gathered the fruit, the produce, then you're not allowed to sell it, because the Torah told you to eat it and not for merchandise. But if someone else, so meaning if Mike is selling my fruit, there's no problem for Mike to sell my fruit because I didn't pick it. Mike didn't pick it, so therefore it's not a problem for him to sell it. And even the Mishnah says that if the father's picking, the son can sell the stuff the father picks, and that's talking about probably a minor son. So it's someone who's his father pays for all of his needs and stuff. So in some ways, the son is just an extension of the father. Even in that case, it's mutter. So according to this opinion, it seems that it wouldn't be prohibited to sell a large quantity either. The only thing that would be prohibited is you can't have a certain stall in the marketplace or a certain corner that you sell it in certain times. You couldn't sell on a regular basis. That would still be prohibited. Now, again, I'm not sure. So according to the Ramban, we can understand that you can have a lot of produce because the Ramban's opinion is as long as the field wasn't locked up, it's not prohibited. But according to other opinions, I'm just not sure how you would have such a large amount of quantity of produce to sell. Unless, let's say, you went for 4 days in a row and picked 3 meals worth of stuff, and you only ate 1 meal a day, so you end up having, an extra eight meals worth of food. So the way that you gathered it was a permitted way, a semi-permitted way at least. And it appears, according to this opinion, that you're just not allowed to sell produce that you pick. Then, if you want to deal with it as a commodity, just like we have commodity traders. So let's say you're buying from Chaim Pipik and selling to Shmirel, and trying to turn over a profit, then that would be mutter. But some Rishonim say that that's not okay. you would not be able to have any fruit markets or fruit trucks or fruit and vegetable sellers on Shmita. The only thing you would have is people selling small amounts to other people, and they couldn't do it on a regular basis, or even in a regular speed. They can't sell it. That's their corner to where they have their. I mean, here we see it sometimes. People they have their on the back of their pickup truck. They have pineapples and watermelons and stuff. So for this, you couldn't do it at the same corner that you normally do it at if it was Shmita produce. So Tosos isn't sure, says Rav Kook, that if you want to buy from Chaim Pipik and sell to Shmirel in order to make a profit in the meantime, I bought it for $1.75 and I'm going to sell it for $2. So is prohibited, even according to the opinion that I'm allowed to sell it if it's not me, if I didn't pick it. Meaning, according to that opinion, you're only allowed to do it if you're trying to sell it. But when you're trying to make a profit off of Shemitah produce, even that's not allowed. Okay. And according to the opinion who allow you to those who allow you to buy and sell if you didn't as long as you weren't you could sell it as long as you didn't pick it, then you can sell it. We mentioned Bahavla, meaning I picked something yesterday. I have 2 extra cucumbers, but I also bought from Chaim Pipik. I bought 3 cucumbers, so I have 5 cucumbers. So I'd be allowed to sell the stuff that I picked because I have, even though I'm normally not allowed to, according to this opinion, that I'm not allowed to sell what I picked. But since I have stuff that I didn't pick and I'm allowed to sell that, then once I'm selling that, I can also sell the stuff that I had myself picked. We mentioned this several times in the last couple of weeks. Also, like the example is if you hire a babysitter for Shabbos, you can't pay the babysitter because that's working on Shabbos. But you also had them babysit on Thursday night. So then since you have to pay them for Thursday night, you could also pay them for Shabbos. So it's just, that's the idea, havla. It's being swallowed up or included in something else. So since I bought some fruit from Chaim Pipik and I'm allowed to sell that since I didn't pick it, I could also sell along with that a few other some things that I had picked myself. With challah. So if the wheat was really Shemitah wheat, then it would not be so easy to buy and sell challah, I guess. Again, I guess. So when Rav Kook in the early years there, when he did a heter mechira and he used an oter beis din, so it was like a co-op. And what happened to the money? Did the money? I would assume that according to Rav Kook's doing that, so meaning according to the way that the oter beis din runs today, based on the Chazon Ish's opinion, the money. It's a big question actually, because they were using prepaid cards, meaning if you were joining the oter beis din, oh, so I mean nowadays they use prepaid cards. So even though the fruit has kedusha, the oter beis din is based on the premise that you're not buying for the fruit, you're buying for the labor and for the transportation costs, but you're not buying for the fruit. So since you're not buying the produce, there's the sanctity is there's no sanctity to transfer with the money. That must be what they hold. So that's not a problem. And according to Rav Kook, he used the oter beis din, and we saw that people got jugs of wine, and the jugs weren't even the same type of jugs. But according to him, since they already were holding that they sold the land and the land didn't have kedusha, so according to that, it didn't have kedusha shmita anyway. But if you had real wheat or real grapes that were Shmita, it'd be very difficult for many reasons. The Gemara learns it from a pasuk that you have to eat hamotzi, a suda with bread on Shabbos. And it's a machlokas how we pass in. There's one opinion in the Gemara, even 4 meals you're obligated. We seem to pass in 3 meals, but the Machaber seems to pass in only 2 of them you have to wash on, and you should wash for shalosh shudas. But if you only had mizonos, it's okay. So whether that's actually a diaraisa or it's just a rabbinic thing that they connected to the pasuk, it's called nasmachta. That's possible. But let's say something that you definitely have to eat. There's no doubt about it. Would be matzah on Pesach night. There's no way getting around that. So you're saying when it's a mitzvah, what do you do?
What's the question?
Let's say you need to buy a challah for Shabbos, and the challah is from Shemitah wheat. So if that's really what it is, so you can buy it because it's certainly not more than 3 meals worth of challah because it's just for your Shabbos meals. But the money that you pay with it gets sanctity of Shemitah, and so the person who sells it would have to treat that with Shemitah produce. I mean, with sanctity of Shemitah, they could only buy food with it. Now, according to the halach, to the opinion that he mentioned here, that the problem is the seller. If the seller has a lot of money, we're worried that he's not meticulous about Shemitah and he's gonna spend the money on non-Shemitah produce. There'd be a problem of how to ever have a store during Shemitah. Well, I don't know if you'd be allowed to buy and sell in the store, or if a commercial bakery would be able to do it on Shemitah. Probably not, because first of all, how would he have that much, unless it's part of a co-op? That people contract with him to bake their wheat, so he was able to get to bake their bread. So he was able to get wheat on their behalf, or maybe even they supplied it. I'm not sure. It's an interesting question. But like I said, it's actually interesting that I think the people who use the Oter Basin nowadays, which is Chazanish Oter Basin, I think they treat the fruit like Shemitah produce, but I think they must hold that there's no transfer of Kedusha to the money because, first of all, they don't use money. They use special prepaid debit cards. And second of all, you're not paying for the fruit. So there's a very good logic to say that the money could only get the sanctity of Shemitah when you're buying produce with it. But for Oter Basin, you're not buying produce with it. You're buying the labor to bring it to market. And you're actually not actually paying for it. So it's actually an interesting. You're having a kula in one area and a chomer in the other area. The kula is that you're not buying perish vias. But on the other hand, the kedusha, this fruit definitely has sanctity. Very strange. It's a little bit strange. I guess the paradox. Okay, so Rav Kook says, according to the opinion that you're allowed to sell certain produce b'havla, meaning some stuff that I wouldn't be allowed to sell by myself, but if I had some stuff that I'm allowed to sell because someone else picked it, then I'm allowed to sell the stuff that I also picked. What happens if you sell someone not just fruit? Let's say I sell them fruit and I sell them a shirt. the produce has kedusha shvius, but the shirt is a shirt. It's not food. You're allowed to say, I'm giving you all the money for a shirt, and I'm giving you the fruit for free, but he's paying an extra $5 for the shirt. And in that case, it seems that the money will not have Shmitta sanctity. So if you gathered for your produce for yourself to eat, then you're allowed to sell if you have a little bit extra, and that's not considered Isser Schora. But I don't know if he holds this to all opinions, because he mentioned the Rasha's opinion. Was it the Rasha's opinion? Yeah, the Rash and Tosfos, they hold that if you gathered it yourself, you're not allowed to sell it. So I assume he's saying this according to everyone but them. Tosfos and Avodah Zarah says if you gather in order to so if you're gathering to sell, and what you want to do with the money that you sell with is to buy other food, so as long as you don't sell it in the ways that regular sales happen, which in the regular way he's saying is that you buy a lot, you buy a lot in one place, and then you go to the other side of town where they don't have such a good supply, so you could charge more for it, then it is not a prohibition. So part of what he's saying, they know supply and demand. So if they can get it in one place, they go to the other place so they make more profit. If you don't do that, you don't go to where you can make more profit, then it's not prohibited. And according to an opinion in that in the Tosas Avodah Zarah, even though you're not allowed to sell Shmita produce, but you are allowed to give it to a woman to marry her. Meaning we always give a ring, but you're allowed to give any object. Even real estate, even food, but you can't show it to people. He went to Jared's. But yeah, you could even give her food, but you're not allowed to give her, let's say, chametz on Pesach doesn't work. It has to be food that she's allowed to eat. And some say that that you're not allowed to lechatchila give Shmita produce to a woman to marry her, but lechatchila you shouldn't, because it almost looks like buying and selling, because you're getting something in exchange for it. You're getting her as your wife. Okay, there was something I wanted to say on this. Oh, so there's actually a very famous case that a Mishnah in Sukkah mentions, and that's why there's sugyas in Sukkah about Shemitah. It's because of the following halacha. You're not allowed. The esrog has Shemitah sanctity, but lulav is just leaves that doesn't have. That's a branch of a tree that doesn't have Shemitah sanctity. It's not edible, this and that, even though we were talking about last week about parts of palm, but that's not a lulav branch. So the Mishnah says, because you're not allowed to buy or sell the lulav, the person buys the lulav and you give them the esrog for free. So when Rav Kook mentioned that, let's say you buy something else. So I gave the example of a shirt. So you pay extra for the shirt and then you could throw in the vegetables. So it appears, he doesn't say, but it appears that the money you gave for the non-Shemitah object, the money stays clear without any kedusha shvius. But that's actually the textbook case of buying Shemitah produce and something else. You're paying for the lulav and you get the esrog for free, because the esrog is the parish shvius. Okay, halacha beis. Lo wait, what? Oh, I'm in the wrong page. Lo lokech yirako sado mocher. You can't take vegetables from the field and sell them. Lo yitzba miklipe shvius b'schar. And you can't dye if you're a good, people bring you their blankets or their clothes, whatever, and you dye it to a different color. You're not allowed to dye things for money with Shemitah produce. So one of the examples is, we spoke about, they didn't have indigo in those days, but certain madder they had, something called madder, or the Rambam and other people talk about using like nutshells as a dye. So you're not allowed to dye other people's stuff for payment, because we already learned that you're allowed to dye you're allowed to use Shmitta produce as a dye, as long as it's not a food that you're wasting by turning it into a dye. If you bought lakaf yirakos lachav hoser, if you had taken vegetables to eat them hoser and then you had leftover, mutter limkor hamoser badam mishvius. You're allowed to sell the leftovers, but the money that you got for them has sanctity of shmita. Chenim lakat yirakos la'atzma v'lakach me'en beno oben bito macharez mutter badamim demei shvius. Similarly, if you bought for yourself and then your son or grandkid took them and sold them, it's mutter for the person who had bought them, but the money does have Shmita sanctity. So the Rambam, so Rav Kook says, just like you're not allowed to dye other people's clothes for money, with Perishvias, you're not allowed to do it for free, and they'll owe you one. You know what I mean? Because that is like payment for it, and it looks like you are selling. That's what the Rabbi says here. Tosas Yantiv says, in the Mishnah, based on the Kesef Mishnah, that these vegetables that we're talking about here, that if you picked vegetables and then your son took them and sold them, these are talking about things that grew by themselves in a field that don't have a prohibition of tzvichim. Because remember, several months ago, we had a few difficult weeks where we were learning about tzvichim. So the tzvichim is that basically most vegetables you're not allowed to eat at all because we're worried that someone planted them and claimed that they grew by themselves. So these are talking about things that grow in the place where no one would have planted them, so tzvichim doesn't apply. Because tzvichim only applies to things that do get planted. But the Gra says, the Vilna Gaon says that when it said, the Rambam says vegetables of the field, that means they grow in a forest, because a forest is also called a field, and in a forest, people don't plant vegetables. So that's a way that they get around the problem of tzvichim. How he explains the text of the Rambam to be talking about a case where there's no problem of tzvichim. And the Mishnah Rishona says that even to the people who prohibit you from using tzvichim, they say you're not allowed to eat tzvichim. However, you are allowed to sell tzvichim in the ways that you're allowed to sell things. Meaning, either someone else had to pick it so you could sell it, or the things that we spoke about a few minutes ago. And it appears, this is the way Rav Kook is pasking, that if you buy them, what if you're buying them with intention to give them to a non-Jew? For example, in a case where it's mutter. For example, like he was your Shabbos guy working for you on Shabbos. Or he was a laborer that you had, he was your handyman or something, et cetera, and you are obligated to pay him food, to feed him as your worker. So in these cases, you're allowed to feed Shmita produce even to a non-Jew, or for a guest, you'd be allowed to do this. Okay, what's he saying here? Oh, I think Rav Kook is giving another explanation. What about the problem of tzvichim? So Rav Kook says it's not a problem of tzvichim because you're buying these in order to feed them to a non-Jew who you have to feed. And that's how Rav Kook gets around the problem of tzvichim. That's what he's saying. So the Chachamim said a Jew can't have tzvichim, but they didn't say a goy can't have tzvichim. Okay, halacha gimel. You're not allowed to sell Shmita produce by size or by weight or by number. So it doesn't look like you're selling Shmita produce. Instead, you should sell a small amount by estimation, to make it known that it's ownerless. And then you could take the money to buy other things. So you could read the Rambam to say that he doesn't actually give it to you as a form of payment, but since you're doing it by estimate to show, because if it's yours, you would be more meticulous about it. So that's what you're doing for the thing. And then he puts the money down and you take the money. But it almost doesn't look as if there's a direct transfer of money. You could read the Rambam that way. You don't have to, but you could read the Rambam that way. But the Rambam simply means that the money that you got, you have to use it to buy another food. You can't buy it to buy a non-food item, whether it's a pencil, whether it's a shirt, buy a share of Enron with it. I'm just saying Enron because it's, I mean, obviously doesn't exist anymore, but a stock that would be a penny stock that you could afford with this. So there's a Ravid on this halacha. The Ravid says, it continues on the next thing. We'll talk about it in the next halacha. So meaning, if you usually sell them by sizes, something that's this big goes for 50 cents, one that's this big goes for 75 cents, you're not allowed to sell it by size, or you're not allowed to do it by weight. You can't say it's $1.59 a pound. That's selling by weight. And by number is, let's say, you usually sell it by eggs are usually this way. Food is, but you always sell eggs by a dozen. But if you have some type of vegetable that you sell in a certain quantity, you're not allowed to sell it by quantity. Yeah, those stores, they do it by the item. By the item. I mean, they have items that are pretty much uniform in size, but you don't pay by the pound. Right. For even Jewel now, for a few years already, the peppers are by the piece. But Trader Joe's are bananas and peppers also. And Amazon Prime store, I went there once and I was not too happy with it. But yeah, it was all like however many items, it's per item. But that might be because the way their sensors are, they can't tell if you're taking a big item or a small item. So they're all around the same size and they detect the number of items that you're taking. But right, but I still don't think that that's the regular way to sell peppers by the number. Okay, so the Beis Yisrael in the so the stores that do it by the item, it's because it's easier for the cashiers just to count the number of items instead of having to wait. Yeah, I think you're right. So the Beis Yisrael in the Pasuk Shulchan says it's a mitzvah to sell Pirish Shmita at a very cheap price. Even when you're allowed to sell them, you should still you're not doing it to make a profit. You have to sell it very cheap. And because of this, you're not going to sell it by size or by weight or by number, only by estimation, in order that you're always going to estimate on the low side, and it keeps the price extra low. And he also said, based on the text that the Gra had in the Mishnah, that there's no mitzvah to sell it cheaply when you're allowed to sell it. So there seems to be a differing opinion. So then why do they sell it by estimation? It's only just to show that it's per Shmita, and you're supposed to treat it like per Shmita. Meaning, in Israel, some of the fruit sellers, you would ask them, what's your fruit this week? They might tell you it's from the Arab. They might say it's a Oter Beistin. They might say it's Tetan Mechira, meaning whatever they got that week. They don't sell one type. Whatever they can get, that's what they sell. So you have to ask them what they sell. So basically, according to this, when they would have fruit that didn't have Kedusha Shvius, they could sell it the regular way. And by the fact that they sell it the regular way, you know that it doesn't have Kedusha Shvius. But when you see that they're selling it to you by only estimating how much it is, that's a symbol. It's a sign for you that it's Shmita produce, and you have to treat it with Shmita sanctity. So even things that you normally don't sell them by number or by weight or by size, you're not allowed to sell. So even if it's unusual to weigh them, you wouldn't be allowed to do it on Shmita. For example, we were talking, was it last week, about the zucchini flowers? So I think they do zucchini flowers by quantity, but if you would do it by weight, which is an unusual way, it's not allowed. Now, zucchini flowers would have a separate problem with svichim, but that's the idea. So even if to do it in an unusual way, if you usually sell it by quantity and now you're selling it by weight, or usually sell it by weight, now you're doing it by quantity, that's not considered changing the way you normally sell it. You have to do a real estimation. And it appears that even if you normally sell something by size and then Shmita, you want to sell. So he's saying what I just said. I'm saying what he was about to say. I didn't get far enough yet. So if normally you sell something by size, you're not allowed to change it by weight or by quantity for Shmita, even though you're changing from what you normally is, because we didn't say that you're allowed to sell it in an unusual way. We said you're only allowed to sell it by estimating. It's true that if you normally sell this by size, and now you're selling it by weight, you're selling it in an unusual way, but that's only unusual for it. Normally, you sell things either by weight or by size or by quantity. So the only way around it is to use estimation. And the Mishnah Rishona says that it's only prohibited when you're selling. But he argues with this far, and the Mishnah Rishona says, no, you're not allowed to sell it the way you normally sell the other 6 ways of the year, the other 6 years of the Shmita cycle. But, for example, if you sell it by number, now you're selling it by weight, that's okay. So it's machlokas between, who did he bring this? It seems he based it on the Tosas Yantif, but there's a machlokas if you change the way of this. So according to the first opinion of Cook brought down, if you normally sell it by quantity, you can't change it by weight. It doesn't matter. And according to the Mishnah Rishona, you're allowed to change the way you do it just for Shmita. That is considered changing the way you're selling it. Marty, do you have a question?
No.
Okay. Okay, halacha dalid. Va'oged dvarim shedarka and lehelged bebayis limkor b'shuk achsara. So kederach shogin lav lebayis, lo kederach shogin l'shuk. So you're allowed to tie things. So let's say green onions. I think green onions are something that are usually sold. They take a bunch together and put it in a rubber band. I'm just using an example because I think that's how they do it. So something that you would normally bundle like that, something that you would normally bundle if you were taking it home, you're allowed. So you would sell it in the market as an estimation. To then the same way that you would bundle them to bring them to home, but not the way you would bundle them to take them to market. So in order that you won't sell it in the exact way. And something that you don't normally tie for the market, you're not allowed to tie it. So how does he translate this? Because this doesn't have a smooth translation here. One may package those entities that are usually packaged to bring home to sell in the market by estimation in the manner that one packages to bring home, not like one packages in the market. So basically, it's if you normally package something wholesale size, you're not allowed to do it wholesale size on Shmita. You're only allowed to sell it the retail size, to bundle it retail size. So the Ravid says, the Mishnah says, Beis Hillel says, the things that are normally tied for the house, you can tie them for the marketplace. And the explanation is, since you normally, tie it, meaning make a bundle, even to eat it in your house, so you know how many bundles you will need for the week. Also, when you sell them in the marketplace, you're allowed to tie them because that tying isn't a manner of selling. It's only the way of knowing how much vegetable you have. But between one type of tying and another type of tying, we never heard of such a thing. So the Ravid doesn't agree with the Rambam that there's a type of tying for the house, which is a smaller package, and a type of wrapping for the shuk, which would be a wholesale size package. The Ravid says, when it says that you can't tie it in the same way, he's saying you just tie it to know this is how much I use for a meal. So the Ravid is saying just the fact that you bundle isn't a manner of selling. It's just, for apples, I know how many apples I need. But for onions, I don't count individual little strings of green onions. I count it by the bundles. I know how much I need for a few days by counting how many bundles I have. So he's saying that that's not, so the Ravid disagrees with the Rambam's saying that there's 2 types of packaging sizes. So Rav Kook begins by citing the Ravid. that anything which you normally bundle in the house, which is you tie them so you know how many you're going to use for the week for your house, you're allowed to sell them to sell in the market in a case obviously that it's mutter to sell, and there doesn't matter. There's no difference between either a size of a bundle or maybe. So I was saying there's two types of packaging: the retail and the wholesale based on size. But it could have been that they used a different type of knot. That they actually may have used a different style of knot if it was for the market or for the retail. Because we don't know, we've never heard, according to the Rabbi, we don't know that there's a difference in the way of either packaging or the type of knot. That's not a halachic difference. I mean, obviously, type of knots could have halachic significance for Shabbos. What's considered a permanent knot and what's not considered a permanent knot. And that's not a double negative in the sentence. Because since in the house you're going to bundle them anyway, because you have to know this is how much I use for a meal, the fact that you have a bundle of them is not a sign of it's a regular way of doing merchandise. You're not allowed to measure a barrel and sell it the way it is. You can't measure a certain size, let's say a bushel or a smaller thing, and sell it the way it is. You have to say, I am selling you this barrel for $20, or I'm selling you this wheat, this flour for this, but you're not weighing it at all. And furthermore, even if you would, so he's saying, what about someone who after, doing an estimation a few times realizes exactly how much they have? Meaning they've measured stuff for a long time. So when they do this for 5 seconds, they could figure out after a couple of times of doing 5 seconds, they know that they're giving you a half a pound worth. There's some types of people like that. So Rav Kook says if that's what you're doing it and you're inadvertently measuring without intent to measure, that is considered measuring. Even if you're not telling them that this is how much I'm selling you, but you know that but since you know that there's a certain measure to it or a weight, it's as if you're selling with measuring and it's prohibited. So that's an interesting opinion. And you're not allowed to measure with your finger either, based on the length of a finger, because that's considered. So, let's say I want a zucchini that goes from my wrist to my elbow, something like that. Or I want an onion that's at least the diameter of my finger, something like that. That is considered a measurement, and you're not allowed to hint to that you should measure by your finger either, because or going like this, because then that's a way of counting. Whatever, it wasn't a number. This wasn't a measure like of size, but there's something by telling him do something with the fingers, and then you're selling by number. That's not okay either. Hey, Paris chutzar shenichus ulartel yunim karba mita oba mishkal oba minyan. El Paris Haartez asra. So what if you import fruits that don't have sanctity of Shmitta? You cannot sell them by size, weight, or quantity. You have to sell them also by estimation. But if it's clear that they're chutzlaretz fruit, it's mutter. So what would probably mean either because they look different. Let's say for whatever reason the fruit in Israel is a slightly different color than the fruit of chutzlaretz, or maybe it's a fruit that you can't get in Israel. So if you see it, you know that it was brought from chutzlaretz. Still, you have to sell it by estimation. So Rav Kook says, according to this, non-Jews fruit, according to the opinion that there is no kedusha shvius, they wouldn't be worse than Paris of chutzlaretz, and you're not allowed to sell them either by number or weight or quantity. If there's no way to know that they were sold by a non-Jew. But if somehow you know that the non-Jew's produce looks different, then it would have the same status of Paris of imported fruits from chutzlaretz. Except we could say that nowadays most of the fruit. Now this isn't true nowadays, but it was true when Rav Kook was writing this. The majority of the produce came from non-Jews, and when the fields of Jews, many, they did not keep, or there's no obligation of Shemitah anymore. So now he's saying, what if, let's say 90% of the produce is non-Jews, and of the 10% of Jews' fruits, they did Heter Mechira or whatever. So according to us, it doesn't have Kedusha Shemitah anyway because of our need to do it. He puts in there because of the need, whether because we sold it. So then it ends up that what if the fact that you would actually find Jewish-owned produce on Shemitah that actually has sanctity of Shemitah is extremely rare, then it just doesn't make sense that we have to make a gzera to say even the imported fruit you have to sell in an unusual way. So in this case, there would be no prohibition to sell, no prohibition to sell by size, weight, or number, unless it was Israel produce with real kedusha shvius. So basically, he's saying if, like he's saying in his days, that halacha wouldn't apply because the actual percentage of fruit that had real kedusha shvius was minuscule. Let's say it was 5% maybe, because let's say 90% was non-Jews, and let's say even only 5%. Let's say of the 10% of Jews, let's say even half. I don't know if he would say half. Oh, he doesn't say half. So he just says many Jews use Heter Mechira that was needed or whatever. So let's say 5% of Jews did that. So 95% of the produce doesn't have any sanctity, and only 5% does have Kedusha Shvius. So Rav Kook is saying that if anything was imported, in that case, we don't have to treat it. So only the Israeli produce or Palestinian produce in his time, because it wasn't Israel yet. So even though we knew that 95% of it didn't have sanctity of Shemitah, either because of Heter Mechira or because it was non-Jews produce, so then anything imported you could sell normally by weight or by. So Rav Kook is saying it seems when it's, he doesn't necessarily say majority, but when there's a significant amount of produce from Israel that actually has Kedusha Shvius, then this halacha would apply, that imported fruit also has to be sold the same way, only by estimation. But when the vast majority of produce in Eretz Yisrael doesn't have Kedusha Shvius, you're allowed to sell the imported fruit in a regular way. So we're just going to read the next 4 halachas. He has very little, or 5 halachas. He has very little on it. Yeah. So I'm just going to read these halachas just because, and then we'll be done, and then we'll finish after that. We're going to read through Yud. If you have to go, you can go. Vav chomer b'shvius mi behektish. Shmita is more strict than hektish. So hektish is something that someone donated to the Beis Hamikdash. When you redeem hektish, the previously hektish. So let's say someone donated a chicken to the Beis Hamikdash or whatever, and the chicken has no use in the Beis Hamikdash, so they sell it. So once they sold the chicken has no sanctity. But the money that you bought the chicken with, that is owned by the Beis Hamikdash. But Shvius ain't okay. Shemitah produce is not like this. When you sell Shemitah produce, the produce stays holy, and the money becomes holy. He also gets it. The fruit does not become regular. Because the pasuk says it will be holy. That's how we learn that when you sell Shemitah produce or buy it, the money that you buy it with gets sanctity. So it ends up that whoever, the last thing that you buy with it has Kedusha Shvius. Meaning, I bought cucumbers from Jeff. So now Jeff has money, but he has to treat it like Shmita. So he bought chicken from Mike. So that money has to be treated like Shmita. And then Mike had to buy another food with it. So Mike bought peanuts with it. And he bought it from Shmirel. And then Shmirel had to buy food with it. So he bought it. So the money keeps staying with the holiness, even though it's 10 degrees from the original selling. and the fruit and the peanut, I mean the chicken and the peanuts and whatever that the other people bought didn't have any kedusha shvius, it doesn't matter. The money still have kedusha shvius. Kate, that's how does this work out? Lock up a pair of shvius, open me on basar, nasa basar, kosan paris, waffling pair of shvius. If you bought meat with it, either in barter or with the money from it, now the meat has to be eaten with the holiness of Shmita. And you have to declare it ownerless, or according to the Rambam, destroy it at the time of the beer. So then, if the person who sold the meat bought fish with that money, so the money has now gone to the fish. Oh no, he's saying so that the meat doesn't have Shemitah produce anymore because that got sold. But the fish now that you bought with the stuff with the money that you got for selling the meat, that now the fish have kedusha shvius. And then let's say someone sold fish and then bought oil, so then the fish no longer have kedusha shmita, but the oil has it. And then with the money that you got for the oil, then you bought honey. Yatsa shemen v'nikras dvash. So now the oil is now regular, and now the honey has shmita produce. So the original thing that you had sold, along with the last thing, in this example, honey, that has to be, you have to do beer when it's time for beer. And you can't make from either the original item or the last item an ointment, and you're not allowed to cause them to lose, just like any other pair of shvius. If you have to go, just go. Just reading a couple more halachos. Chas. Ein shvius mitzchalos al derech mikach. Shmita could only become unholy, meaning it loses its sanctity, through a sale. Remember free rishon. But a second thing, meaning you sold the cucumbers and then you bought meat with it, that meat can lose its sanctity through another way, through a derech chilo. So he translates it as through a transfer. When you're using, so someone bought cucumbers and the money that the seller of the cucumbers got, he bought meat. So when you're making that new thing that you got, making it not holy, what are you doing? You can't do it through a live animal or a live, whether it's an animal or a fish or a bird. He doesn't mention fish, but probably not. Because if you leave it alive, it might have babies, and you have flocks that all came from Shmita produce. And it certainly applies to Shmita itself. But you can transfer this for food, for animals, so you can't use it for livestock, but you could do it for meat or poultry because they're already dead. So it's going to be consumed in the very near future. Yud, the May Shvius Saint Parma Hansachov. You're not. Okay, we'll leave it here. We'll start with Halacha Yud next week. God willing.
Thank you.
Welcome. Bye.